The dusty parking lot shimmered under the summer sun as Mary pulled up in her old, reliable sedan. She wasn't much for fancy things, and her car reflected that. Today, she was visiting the local shooting range, a place she hadn't been to in years. She hoped she still remembered what to do. Mary was a simple woman, through and through. Her clothes were plain, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her face bore the gentle lines of someone who spent more time tending a garden than primping in front of a mirror. She carried herself with a quiet humility that often led people to underestimate her. As she walked towards the entrance of the shooting range, she felt a knot of nervousness tighten in her stomach. It wasn't the shooting itself that made her anxious, it was the people. She knew how shooting ranges could be, filled with men boasting about their skills and their expensive gear. Mary just wanted a quiet afternoon to herself, a chance to reconnect with a skill she had long neglected. Inside, the air crackled with the sound of gunfire and the smell of gunpowder. Several men were already at the lanes, their voices loud and confident as they discussed ballistics and scopes. Mary felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over her. She clutched her worn leather purse a little tighter and approached the counter, hoping to blend in and avoid drawing attention to herself. She was about to be very, very wrong. The men at the shooting range, most of them decked out in tactical gear and boasting about their customized weapons, barely glanced at Mary as she approached the counter. They were too busy comparing scopes and arguing about the best ammunition. To them, she was just another face, probably a beginner who would waste range time and shoot wildly off target. One man, a burly fellow with a thick beard and a "Don't Tread on Me" t-shirt, chuckled softly to his friend as Mary spoke to the range officer. "Looks like we got ourselves a newbie," he whispered, loud enough for a few others to hear. "Probably never held a gun before in her life." His friend, a skinny guy with glasses perched on his nose, snickered in response. "Bet she'll be lucky to hit the target at all. Maybe she'll shoot the ceiling." They exchanged knowing glances, their faces smug with a sense of superiority. Mary, though seemingly oblivious, couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation. She tried to ignore their remarks, focusing instead on the range officer's instructions. But their words stung nonetheless, reinforcing her initial anxieties. She knew she didn't look like the typical shooter, but their casual dismissal of her abilities fueled a quiet fire within her. She would show them. She just needed to remember everything she was taught all those years ago. Time to get to work. At the rental counter, Mary's simple questions only solidified the men's low opinion of her. "Which rifle would you recommend for a beginner?" she asked the range officer, her voice soft and unassuming. "Well, ma'am," the range officer replied, glancing over at the group of men, "for someone just starting out, I'd suggest a basic. 22, it's easy to handle and has very little recoil." "And how do you load it?" Mary asked, genuinely curious. She knew how, of course, but she played the part well. The burly man with the "Don't Tread on Me" shirt snorted derisively. "She doesn't even know how to load a rifle. This is going to be good." His friend chimed in, "Maybe we should offer her some lessons. For a small fee, of course." They both chuckled, clearly enjoying Mary's perceived ignorance. Mary politely thanked the range officer for his recommendation and rented the 22 along with a box of ammunition. As she walked towards her assigned lane, she deliberately fumbled with the rifle, further reinforcing their preconceived notions. Let them think she was clueless. Let them underestimate her. It would make the surprise all the sweeter. She smiled faintly as she thought to herself, they have no idea what's coming. All according to plan. Mary carefully set up her target downrange, a fresh paper bullseye with crisp, clean lines. She took her time adjusting the stand and ensuring it was perfectly aligned. The men watched with amusement, their smirks widening as they anticipated the show. She loaded the 22 rifle, her movements slow and deliberate, adding to the impression of inexperience. She took a deep breath and raised the rifle to her shoulder. Her stance was awkward, her grip uncertain. She squinted through the sights, her aim wavering slightly. The first shot rang out, the bullet hitting the target far to the left, barely grazing the edge of the paper. A collective chuckle rippled through the group of men. "Looks like she needs a lot of practice," the burly man remarked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Mary adjusted her position slightly and fired again. This time, the bullet hit a little closer to the center, but still missed the bullseye by a wide margin. Another round of snickers erupted from the onlookers. "Maybe she should try throwing the bullets instead," the skinny man quipped, earning a few guffaws from his companions. Mary ignored their taunts and continued to fire, each shot landing erratically around the target. It was a deliberate performance, designed to lull them into a false sense of security. But soon it would be time to change the tune. She could feel the dormant skill awakening within her, the muscle memory returning with each shot, no matter how seemingly inaccurate. The real show was about to begin. The burly man, whose name was Bob according to the name tag on his tactical vest, couldn't resist offering his unsolicited advice. He sauntered over to Mary's lane, a condescending smile plastered on his face. "Excuse me, ma'am," Bob said, his voice dripping with patronizing concern. "I couldn't help but notice you're having a little trouble there. Maybe I can offer a few pointers." Mary paused, lowered the rifle, and turned to face him, her expression neutral. "Oh, really? That's very kind of you." Bob puffed out his chest, eager to display his expertise. "Well, for starters, your stance is all wrong. You need to widen your feet, bend your knees, and lean forward slightly. And your grip is too tight. Relax your fingers and let the rifle do the work." He proceeded to demonstrate the correct stance and grip, his movements exaggerated and self-important. Mary listened patiently, nodding occasionally but making no attempt to implement his suggestions. "And most importantly," Bob continued, "you need to focus on your breathing. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly, and squeeze the trigger on the exhale. That's how you achieve accuracy." Mary smiled politely. "Thank you for the advice. I'll keep that in mind." But as Bob turned to leave, she knew she wouldn't use a single word of it. She had her own methods honed over years of training, and they were far more effective than Bob's superficial tips. The charade was almost over. It was time to get serious. Mary took a deep breath, not Bob's prescribed inhale-exhale, but a centering breath, a breath she had practiced countless times under far more stressful conditions. She closed her eyes for a moment, visualizing the target, not just the paper bullseye, but the precise point at its center. She cleared her mind of all distractions, all doubts, all traces of the simple woman she had been pretending to be. When she opened her eyes, something had shifted. The nervous, uncertain demeanor had vanished, replaced by a quiet intensity. Her shoulders straightened, her back arched slightly, and her grip on the rifle tightened, not with tension, but with controlled strength. Her stance, though still seemingly unassuming, became subtly more stable, more balanced. The change was so subtle that only a trained eye would have noticed it. Bob, still basking in the afterglow of his unsolicited advice, missed it entirely. He was too busy congratulating himself on his generosity. Mary raised the rifle again, her movements fluid and precise. There was no hesitation, no wavering. Her eyes locked onto the target, her focus absolute. The rifle became an extension of her arm, an instrument of precision. The transformation was complete. The game had changed. The silence at the shooting range was abruptly shattered by the sharp crack of the .22 rifle. This time, however, there was no errant shot, no grazing of the target, no suppressed laughter. The bullet flew straight and true, piercing the very center of the bullseye with a satisfying thwack. A collective gasp went through the group of men. Bob's jaw dropped. His condescending smile vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Mary didn't react. She simply reloaded the rifle, her movements smooth and efficient. She raised it to her shoulder, took aim, and fired again. Another shot, another bullseye, this one even more precise than the last. "Beginner's luck," Bob muttered, trying to salvage his bruised ego. But even he didn't sound convinced. Mary fired a third shot, and then a fourth, and then a fifth. Each bullet found its mark with unwavering accuracy, creating a tight cluster of holes in the center of the target. The snickers and taunts had ceased completely, replaced by an awed silence. The men watched in stunned silence as their preconceived notions shattered before their eyes. The simple woman was anything but. She was a marksman of exceptional skill. Bob's initial disbelief morphed into a growing unease. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Mary and the target as if trying to find a logical explanation for what he was witnessing. His advice, once delivered with such confidence, now seemed hollow and inadequate. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Okay, so she got lucky a few times," he said, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. "Big deal. Anyone can hit a bullseye now and then." But even as he spoke, Mary fired again and again, each shot landing with pinpoint accuracy. The cluster of holes in the center of the target grew tighter and tighter, forming a ragged circle of perfection. Bob's face flushed red. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He had spent years honing his skills at the shooting range, investing in expensive equipment and boasting about his accuracy. And now, this simple woman who had appeared so clueless just moments ago was out shooting him with a basic .22 rifle. It was an unbearable blow to his ego. He suddenly felt very small. His chest was tight. He was starting to get angry. He had to say something. He had to do something. But what? Mary, oblivious to Bob's internal turmoil, continued her steady rhythm. Shot after shot, the 22 sang its precise song, each note a perfect bullseye. She reached 7 bullseyes, then 8, then 9. The silence in the shooting range was now absolute, broken only by the sound of the rifle and the thwack of the bullets hitting the target. Bob's anger began to subside, replaced by a grudging admiration. He could no longer deny the skill he was witnessing. It was beyond luck, beyond chance. It was pure, unadulterated talent. He watched her intently, studying her stance, her grip, her breathing, trying to glean some secret from her technique. But there was nothing flashy or ostentatious about her movements. She was simply focused, calm, and deadly accurate. As Mary prepared for her 10th and final shot, Bob felt a strange mix of emotions. He was still embarrassed by his earlier arrogance, but he was also genuinely impressed. He had come to the shooting range expecting to show off his skills, but he had instead been humbled by a simple woman with a hidden talent. He almost didn't want her to take the final shot. It was as if he knew it would seal his fate. One way or the other, this was going to be interesting. Mary exhaled slowly, her finger gently squeezing the trigger. The 10th shot echoed through the range, and a collective breath was held. The thwack that followed was almost anticlimactic. She lowered the rifle, her expression unchanged. The target, however, told a different story. 10 bullets, 10 perfect bullseyes, clustered so tightly together that they seemed to form a single, ragged whole. It was a display of marksmanship that bordered on the unbelievable. A stunned silence hung in the air. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was the gentle hum of the ventilation system. The men who had mocked her, who had underestimated her, were now completely speechless, their faces a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and disbelief. Bob stood frozen, his mouth agape. He had never seen anything like it. He had witnessed countless shooters at the range over the years, but none possessed the skill, the precision, the sheer talent that Mary had just displayed. 10 blind bullseyes in a row. It was legendary. It was almost mythical. And it had been achieved by a simple woman with a .22 rifle. The world suddenly seemed a lot stranger, and a lot more interesting, than it had just a few minutes before. What was her secret? The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words. Every eye in the shooting range was fixed on Mary. She became the epicenter of attention, a stark contrast to the anonymity she had sought just moments before. The men, once so confident and boisterous, now stood humbled, their earlier mockery hanging in the air like a shameful secret. The skinny man with glasses nervously adjusted his spectacles, avoiding Mary's gaze. The range officer, who had initially steered her towards the .22 rifle, looked on with a mixture of surprise and vindication. Even the distant sound of gunfire from other lanes seemed to fade, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Bob, finally snapping out of his stupor, took a tentative step forward. The smugness had completely vanished from his face, replaced by a look of genuine curiosity and respect. He cleared his throat, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Ma'am," he began, hesitant and almost apologetic. "That was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." He paused, searching for the right words. "I was wondering, how did you do that?" He gestured towards the target, still struggling to comprehend the sheer precision of her shooting. The question hung in the air, a plea for explanation, a desire to understand the secret behind her extraordinary talent. It was now time for Mary to speak. Mary considered Bob's question for a moment, her gaze steady and thoughtful. The silence in the range seemed to deepen, as if everyone was hanging on her every word. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but clear, carrying easily through the hushed atmosphere. "It's a long story," she began, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "But let's just say I've had a little experience." She paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. "My father was a Marine," she continued, "and he taught me everything I know. He started me young with air rifles and BB guns, and gradually worked me up to more powerful weapons." She looked down at the .22 rifle in her hands, a flicker of nostalgia in her eyes. "I spent years honing my skills, practicing every day, rain or shine. It became a part of me." Bob leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "So, you were a competitive shooter?" Mary shook her head. "Not exactly. My training was more specialized than that." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say I spent some time working in a field where accuracy was essential." She left the statement hanging, allowing the men to draw their own conclusions. The implications were clear, but she didn't elaborate further. She wanted to keep it simple. She wanted to keep it vague. She did not want to talk about it. A wave of heat shimmers above a desert landscape. A younger Mary, perhaps 20 years old, lies prone in the sand, her face camouflaged with streaks of green and brown. She peers through the scope of a high-powered sniper rifle, her breathing slow and deliberate. The sun beats down mercilessly, but she remains motionless, her focus unwavering. In the distance, a target appears, a small, barely visible silhouette. Mary adjusts her scope, compensating for the wind and the heat distortion. She takes a deep breath, exhales slowly, and squeezes the trigger. The rifle recoils sharply and the bullet streaks across the desert, striking the target with deadly accuracy. A nearby observer calls out the hit, his voice barely audible over the wind. Cut to a different scene, Mary is now in a classroom surrounded by other young recruits. A stern-faced instructor is lecturing them on the principles of ballistics and long-range shooting. Mary listens intently, her eyes focused on the instructor, absorbing every detail. The instructor points to a diagram on the board. Accuracy is paramount, he says, his voice firm. In this field, there is no room for error. Lives depend on your ability to hit your target every single time. Back in the desert, Mary is shown disassembling and reassembling her rifle with incredible speed and precision. She moves with a practiced efficiency, her hands knowing exactly what to do. It is clear she has done this countless times before. The skills are etched into her very being. Now back to the present. Back in the present, Mary sighed softly, the weight of her past momentarily settling upon her shoulders. She shook it off, focusing on the present moment. But that was a long time ago, she said, her voice regaining its lightness. I don't do that anymore. Bob looked at her, his eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of understanding. So, what do you do now? Mary smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up her face. I garden, she said simply. I grow vegetables and flowers. It's a much more peaceful life. The men looked at each other, a mixture of surprise and comprehension on their faces. It was hard to reconcile the image of the deadly sniper with the simple woman who grew vegetables in her garden. But somehow it made sense. She had traded a life of precision and danger for a life of peace and tranquility. She had chosen to leave her past behind to embrace a simpler existence. I find it very rewarding, Mary continued. There's something very satisfying about nurturing life, about watching things grow. She paused, her eyes twinkling. Besides, she added with a wink, it's also a field where accuracy is essential. You don't want to plant your tomatoes too close together, you know. The men chuckled softly, the tension in the air finally dissipating. The moment of revelation had passed, leaving behind a sense of respect and understanding. The world made sense again. Mary began to gather her things, carefully packing the .22 rifle back into its case and collecting her empty shell casings. The men watched her, a newfound respect evident in their eyes. Bob, in particular, seemed to be struggling to reconcile the image of the unassuming gardener with the deadly marksman he had just witnessed. Well, Mary said, breaking the silence, it's been an interesting afternoon. Thank you for the company. She offered a polite nod to the group, her eyes lingering for a moment on Bob. Thank you, ma'am, Bob replied, his voice sincere. It was an honor to watch you shoot. You're truly gifted. Mary smiled faintly. It's just a skill, she said modestly. Like anything else, it takes practice. She turned to leave, her movements graceful and unhurried. As she walked away, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had proven her point, not with arrogance or boasting, but with skill and quiet determination. She had shown them that appearances can be deceiving and that everyone has a story to tell. She had also reminded herself that the skills she had honed over years of training were still there, dormant but not forgotten. It was a comforting thought. It was time to go. As Mary walked away, the men remained rooted to the spot, watching her every move. The atmosphere in the shooting range had shifted dramatically. The earlier bravado and condescension had been replaced by a quiet introspection. Bob, still reeling from the revelation of Mary's past, turned to his friend, the skinny man with glasses. I can't believe it, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. All this time, I thought she was just some clueless beginner. His friend nodded slowly, his eyes wide with realization. Me too, he admitted. I guess we were wrong. Wrong is an understatement, Bob replied. We completely misjudged her. We saw what we wanted to see, not what was actually there. He paused, reflecting on his earlier behavior. I offered her advice, thinking I was doing her a favor. But she probably knew more about shooting than I ever will. The skinny man chuckled softly. Yeah, and we were laughing at her, making fun of her. Now I just feel like an idiot. Bob sighed. Me too. It's a good reminder not to judge a book by its cover. You never know what someone's been through, what they're capable of. They both looked at the target, the 10 perfect bullseyes, a stark reminder of their misjudgment. They had learned a valuable lesson that day, a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. They would never again underestimate someone based on appearances. Outside, Mary walked towards her old sedan, the setting sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. She unlocked the car, slipped behind the wheel, and started the engine. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced back at the shooting range one last time. She smiled to herself, a knowing smile that spoke of quiet confidence and inner peace. She had accomplished what she had set out to do, not to prove herself to anyone, but to remind herself that she was still capable, still strong, still a force to be reckoned with. The shooting range receded into the distance, becoming just another building on the side of the road. Mary merged onto the highway, heading towards home, towards her garden, towards the simple life she had chosen. As she drove, she thought about the men she had met at the range, about their initial arrogance and their eventual humility. She hoped they had learned a lesson that day, a lesson about respect and understanding, about looking beyond the surface and seeing the person within. She knew that the world was full of people like her, people who were underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. People who had hidden talents and untold stories. And she hoped that, in some small way, her actions that day had helped to change the way people saw them. To make them think twice before judging a book by its cover. To see the strength and beauty that lay hidden beneath the surface. She headed back home. The camera pans back, showing Mary's car disappearing down the highway, blending seamlessly into the flow of traffic. She becomes just another face in the crowd, just another car on the road. The shooting range, with its secrets and its lessons, fades into the background. But the memory of Mary, the simple woman who sniped 10 blind bullseyes in a row, lingers in the air. She becomes a silent reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that everyone has a story to tell, and that true strength often lies hidden beneath the surface. The story ends not with a grand pronouncement or a dramatic revelation, but with a quiet understanding. A realization that the world is full of surprises and that we should never underestimate the power of the human spirit. Perhaps, somewhere down the line, Bob and his friend will encounter another unassuming individual. Someone who challenges their preconceived notions and forces them to reevaluate their assumptions. And perhaps, they will remember Mary, the simple woman who taught them a valuable lesson about respect, humility, and the importance of looking beyond appearances. The end.